The morning light filtered through the half-drawn curtains, casting soft beams on the hardwood floor. My head ached, not from the champagne I'd sipped sparingly the night before, but from the gnawing unease that had lodged itself in my chest. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous evening like a broken record. It had been a lively night. Our friends Brad and Lisa had invited us over for their annual open house party. Their events were legendary, sprawling gatherings where half the town seemed to show up. The laughter, clinking of glasses, and low hum of conversation blended into an intoxicating atmosphere. Kevin, my husband, had been in high spirits, his usual charming self. Too charming, I realize now, as I recall how his hand lingered a little too long on Lisa's friend Amanda's arm, how his laugh seemed louder and more genuine in her presence. I had brushed it off, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. Amanda was younger, bolder, a free spirit who thrived on attention. She flirted with everyone. It didn't mean anything, or so I told myself. As the night wore on, Kevin had disappeared into the crowd, and I assumed he was catching up with some of the guys or refilling his drink. When I didn't see him for a while, I'd gone looking, but the house was a maze of people. Brad reassured me he'd probably gone to cool off somewhere upstairs. It wasn't uncommon for people to crash in one of the guest rooms after drinking too much. Reluctantly, I let it go. I stayed downstairs, mingling, even though my mood had soured. By the time the party fizzled out, I was too drained to argue when someone suggested I take the guest couch. Kevin hadn't returned, but I figured he was upstairs sleeping off the night. Exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. This morning, I woke up with that uneasy feeling still clinging to me. I swung my legs over the edge of the couch and padded through the quiet house. The remnants of the party were scattered everywhere. Empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and the faint smell of stale alcohol. Upstairs, I found the door to one of the guest rooms slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I saw Kevin sprawled on the bed, fully dressed, his hair mussed. Relief washed over me for a moment, until I noticed the other figure lying next to him. Amanda. My breath caught and the room seemed to tilt. She was on her side, facing him, her makeup smudged, her dress hiked up in a way that left nothing to the imagination. I stood frozen, my mind racing to find some logical explanation. Maybe she just needed a place to crash. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But then I noticed his arm, the way it was draped across her waist, his fingers curled lightly against the fabric of her dress.
Familiar.
Intimate. The kind of touch that used to be reserved for me. I couldn't stop the sharp gasp that escaped my lips. It was enough to stir Kevin. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he looked disoriented. Then he saw me, and his face drained of color. "Liz," he said, his voice hoarse, thick with sleep or guilt. "It's not what it looks like." The cliché of his words hit me like a slap. My hands trembled as I fought to keep my voice steady. "Then what is it, Kevin? Because it looks like my husband spent the night in bed with another woman." Amanda stirred, blinking up at me with an expression that teetered between embarrassment and indifference. "Oh, hey," she mumbled, as if we were casually crossing paths at a coffee shop. Kevin scrambled to sit up, his movements clumsy. I was drunk. I don't even remember." His voice trailed off, and the weight of his words sank in. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. "You don't remember?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's your defense? That you were too drunk to remember betraying me?" His hands flew up, palms outward as if warding off my anger. "It didn't mean anything. I swear, Liz. I was wasted. I didn't know what I was doing." Wasted. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. "You think that makes it okay? You think I care why you did it?" Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Amanda, who was now sitting up, looking mildly uncomfortable but making no move to leave. The audacity of it made my blood boil. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "I trusted you with everything, and this is how you repay me? By crawling into bed with her." Kevin's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the man I fell in love with, the man who used to make me feel like I was his whole world. But that man was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Liz, please," he begged. "Don't throw everything away over one mistake. It was just the alcohol. It'll never happen again." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But the image of them together was seared into my mind, a painful reminder that the trust between us had been shattered. And trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. The November air was cold and sharp against my skin as I stepped outside. My chest felt heavy, each breath a struggle as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, it was all a lie. And yet, as I stood there, trembling in the morning light, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a cruel truth. This was only the beginning. I wandered aimlessly down the street, each step carrying me farther from the house that now felt like a battlefield. The crisp autumn leaves crunched beneath my feet, a jarring reminder of the world's indifference to the storm raging inside me. People passed by with cups of coffee in hand, their faces neutral, unaware of the devastation in mine. My breath came in short gasps, my chest constricting as the weight of betrayal bore down on me. Memories of Kevin and me flashed through my mind, unbidden and relentless. The day we met at a mutual friend's barbecue. How his easy smile and quick wit drew me in. Our first awkward date, where we bonded over our shared love of old movies and bad takeout. The night he proposed under a canopy of stars, his voice trembling as he promised to love me forever. Forever. What a fragile, breakable word. I reached a small park at the edge of the neighborhood and sank onto a bench, burying my face in my hands. The sharp chill of the air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. All I could feel was the ache in my chest, the sting of his betrayal. How could he do this to me? How could he stand there, in the room where I found him, and offer me such a pathetic excuse? I was drunk. As if that erased everything. As if his intoxication somehow absolved him of guilt. The longer I sat there, the angrier I became. At first, my rage had been directed solely at Kevin, but now it began to spread like wildfire. Amanda. She wasn't just some stranger. She was a part of our social circle. She knew me. She knew Kevin was married. And yet, she had the audacity to climb into bed with him. Her casual indifference when I confronted them was the final insult. Did she feel no shame?
No remorse?
I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I didn't know what hurt more. The betrayal itself or the realization that the people I trusted could betray me so easily. Was my marriage just a facade? Had Kevin always been capable of this, and I had simply been blind to it? These questions swirled in my mind, unanswerable and relentless. The sound of children playing nearby broke through my thoughts. I looked up and saw a little girl chasing after a boy with a plastic sword, her laughter ringing out like a bell. For a moment, I felt an ache deeper than anything I had experienced since discovering Kevin's infidelity. We had talked about having children, dreamed about it even, but we kept putting it off, always waiting for the perfect time. Now I wondered if there would ever be a time for us, if us even existed anymore. I stayed on that bench for what felt like hours, watching the world go on around me. Slowly, the anger and hurt solidified into something colder, harder, resolve. I couldn't sit there forever wallowing in my pain. I needed to act. I needed answers. And most importantly, I needed to decide what came next. When I finally returned to the house, the tension hit me the moment I opened the door. Kevin was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes filled with something that could have been remorse or fear, or both. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't," I said, my voice flat. "Not yet." I went upstairs and grabbed my things, a bag, my wallet, my phone. I needed space to think, and I wasn't going to find it here. When I came back down, Kevin stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Liz, wait," he said, his voice pleading. "Can we just talk about this?" "Talk about what, Kevin?" I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Talk about how you ended up in bed with another woman? Talk about how you're blaming it on being drunk like that makes it okay." He flinched, but I didn't care. He deserved every ounce of my fury. "You don't even know what happened," he said quietly. I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea. You got drunk, Amanda was there, and one thing led to another. Isn't that the story?" He didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head, my throat tightening with unshed tears. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice trembling. I need time. I need space. Where are you going? He asked, panic creeping into his tone. I don't know, I admitted. But I can't stay here, Kevin. Not with you. I walked out the door without looking back, leaving him standing there, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized I had no plan, no destination, just a need to get away from the wreckage of my marriage and the man I thought I could trust. I ended up at a hotel on the outskirts of town, a nondescript place with bland decor and an air of anonymity. It was exactly what I needed. After checking in, I collapsed onto the bed, the weight of the day finally catching up with me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic mess of thoughts and emotions. What was I supposed to do now? Could I forgive him? Could I even begin to rebuild what we had, knowing it would never be the same? Sleep eventually claimed me, but it was restless and filled with fragmented dreams. Kevin's face haunted me, as did Amanda's. In one dream, I was back at the party, watching them from across the room as they laughed together, completely oblivious to me. In another, I was standing in the doorway of that guest room again, unable to move as the scene replayed itself over and over. When I woke, the clarity I had hoped for hadn't come. Instead, I was left with the same questions, the same pain. But one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore what had happened. I couldn't sweep it under the rug and pretend everything was fine. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The hours stretched into days, and I remained at the hotel, caught in a limbo between anger and despair. I avoided Kevin's calls at first, the sight of his name flashing on my screen sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. Each voicemail he left went unheard. The notifications piling up like debris from a wreckage, I didn't have the strength to sift through. The world outside moved on, cars passed by my window, the faint hum of life carrying on just beyond the sterile walls of my room. But I was stuck, replaying everything that had led to this point. By the third day, I realized I couldn't stay holed up in that room forever. I needed to face him, to demand answers, even if I wasn't sure I could handle hearing them. The thought of returning home filled me with dread, but it was the only place I could go. I packed my things, paid the bill, and drove back, the car radio silent because no music or podcast could drown out the noise in my head. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car parked out front. He hadn't gone to work. Whether out of guilt or a need to intercept me, I couldn't tell. My stomach churned as I unlocked the front door, bracing myself for whatever awaited me inside. The house was eerily quiet, and for a moment, I thought he might not be home after all. Then I heard the faint creak of a chair from the living room. He was sitting there, a beer bottle in his hand despite the early hour. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept since I left. The sight of him should have softened something in me, but it didn't. It only fueled the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You're back," he said, his voice hoarse. He set the bottle down and stood, taking a tentative step toward me. I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," I said sharply. "Just don't." Kevin froze, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I've been trying to call you." "I know." I crossed my arms, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the chaos inside me. "And I needed space. But I'm here now. So talk." He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Liz, I don't even know where to start." "How about the truth?" I said, my voice colder than I intended. "What happened that night, Kevin? And don't you dare lie to me." He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before. "I told you I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." "Stop," I snapped. "Stop using that as an excuse. Drunk or not, you made a choice. You knew what you were doing when you touched her, when you let her into that bed. So don't tell me you didn't know." He flinched at the venom in my tone, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty for it. I deserved the truth even if it tore me apart. He sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "It wasn't planned," he said finally, his voice muffled. "We were talking and, I don't know. One minute we were laughing and the next." His words trailed off, leaving a gaping hole where the explanation should have been. "And the next." I pressed, my nails digging into my palms. He looked up, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. The next I woke up and she was there. I don't even remember how it happened, Liz. I swear to you it meant nothing. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and grating even to my own ears. It meant nothing, I repeated. Do you even hear yourself? You threw away everything we had for nothing. Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds? He stood abruptly, his face twisting with frustration. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm telling you the truth. I was stupid and I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you, Liz. I love you and I can't lose you over this. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He sounded sincere, desperate even, but they rang hollow against the image of him lying in that bed. His arm wrapped around Amanda like it belonged there. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. It wasn't supposed to leave scars. You already lost me, I said quietly, my voice shaking. The moment you let her into our marriage, you lost me. His face crumpled and for a brief second I thought he might cry. But instead he reached for me, his movements frantic. Please, Liz. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't give up on us. I took a step back, putting more distance between us. You gave up on us, Kevin. You gave up the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. Instead, I turned and walked up the stairs, my legs trembling with the effort. I needed space even within the walls of my own home. In the bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to believe him, to hold on to the life we had built together. But the other part, the one that had seen him in that bed with Amanda, knew it would never be the same. Trust wasn't something you could glue back together. Once it was broken, the cracks always showed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo on the nightstand. It was from our wedding day. Both of us smiling, oblivious to the challenges that lay ahead. I picked it up, tracing the curve of his face with my thumb, and for the first time since that morning the tears came. They spilled down my cheeks in hot, relentless streams, and I didn't bother wiping them away. I cried for the man I thought I knew, for the life we had built, for the future I wasn't sure we had anymore. And as the sobs racked my body, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How do you forgive someone who destroyed you? I stayed in the bedroom for hours, letting the ache consume me, hoping that if I felt it deeply enough, it might burn itself out. But pain doesn't work that way. It lingers, seeps into the cracks of your soul, and finds places to hide, waiting for quiet moments to ambush you again. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in shadows, I hadn't moved from the bed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen. A text from my best friend Marissa. Hey, are you okay? I've been worried about you. Call me if you need to talk. For a moment I considered ignoring it. Talking about what happened would make it more real, as if my pain wasn't already suffocating enough. But Marissa had a way of grounding me, of making me feel less alone. And right now I needed that more than anything. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. Liz? Oh, thank God. I was starting to freak out, she said, her voice a mix of relief and concern. What's going on? I've been trying to reach you since the party. The lump in my throat made it hard to speak, but somehow I managed. Marissa. He cheated on me. Saying the words out loud felt like ripping open a wound all over again. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with anger. Kevin? That bastard. What happened? I told her everything, the party, Amanda, the guest room, his pathetic excuses. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse, and the tears were back, streaming down my face in silent rivers. Marissa didn't interrupt, letting me spill everything out in one painful torrent. When I finally fell silent, she let out a shaky breath. Liz, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. You don't deserve this. None of it. I don't know what to do, I whispered. He keeps saying it was a mistake, that he was drunk, but how am I supposed to believe him? How am I supposed to trust him again? Maybe you can't, she said bluntly, her honesty a double-edged sword. But you don't have to decide that right now. You're in shock. Take your time, figure out what you need, and don't let him pressure you into anything. Her words brought a small measure of clarity. I didn't have to have all the answers today. The thought was both a relief and a burden, because it meant there was no easy fix to this mess. I never thought he'd do this to me, I said, my voice breaking. I thought we were happy. Sometimes people don't show us who they really are until it's too late, Marissa said quietly. But this isn't your fault, Liz. Don't let him make you think it is. Her unwavering support was a lifeline, and for the first time since that awful morning, I felt a flicker of strength. We talked for a while longer, her steady voice calming the storm inside me, until I finally felt ready to end the call. She promised to check on me the next day, and I believed her. Marissa was the kind of friend who showed up when it mattered most. After hanging up, I sat in the stillness of the room, her words echoing in my mind. I didn't have to decide anything yet. I could take my time. But time didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like a punishment, stretching endlessly before me, filled with questions I didn't know how to answer. I heard Kevin moving around downstairs, the faint clink of dishes and the hum of the television. The sound of him, so normal and domestic, made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream at him, to throw every accusation I'd been holding back, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo what he'd done or make the pain go away. That night, I slept in the guest room, the irony of it not lost on me. The bed was cold and unfamiliar, but at least it was mine. Kevin didn't try to come in, and for that I was grateful. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee wafting through the house. For a moment I almost forgot everything. The scent stirring memories of lazy Sunday mornings spent together, talking and laughing over breakfast. Then reality crashed back, sharp and unforgiving. I found him in the kitchen, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked up when I entered, his expression a mixture of hope and dread. "I made coffee," he said, his voice tentative. I ignored him and poured myself a cup, the silence between us heavy and oppressive. I sat at the table staring into the dark liquid, wondering how we had ended up here. He sat across from me, fidgeting with his mug, as if waiting for permission to speak. Finally I broke the silence. "Do you even understand what you've done? How badly you've hurt me?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the pain in them. "I do," he said softly, "and I hate myself for it." "Good," I said, the word cutting like a knife. "You should." He nodded, as if he expected nothing less. "Liz, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll prove to you that you can trust me again." I wanted to laugh, to tell him that trust wasn't something you could just rebuild with promises and good intentions. But instead I said, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Kevin. And I don't know if I want to." The words hung between us, stark and final. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me otherwise. Maybe he knew it was pointless. Or maybe he was just too ashamed. Either way, the silence that followed felt like the end of something, though I wasn't sure if it was the end of us or just the end of who we used to be. For the next few days we existed in a strange limbo. I avoided him as much as possible, retreating to the guest room or leaving the house altogether. I went for long walks trying to clear my head, but the pain followed me everywhere, a constant shadow I couldn't escape. Marissa checked in daily, her support a small comfort in the midst of the chaos. She offered to let me stay with her, and though the temptation was strong, I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. One evening as I sat alone in the guest room, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Amanda. My heart sank as I opened it, dread pooling in my stomach. "Liz, I'm so sorry for what happened. I never meant to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, a thousand emotions swirling inside me. Anger, confusion, bitterness. What could she possibly have to say that would make any of this better? But a small masochistic part of me wanted to hear her out, if only to get some kind of closure. I didn't reply right away, but the thought lingered in my mind, an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. That night as I lay in bed, I realized something that terrified me. I didn't know who I was anymore. My entire identity had been wrapped up in Kevin, in our life together. Without that I felt untethered, lost. And I didn't know if I could ever find my way back. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of hollow mornings and sleepless nights. The house, once a sanctuary, felt suffocating now, every corner holding a memory I didn't want to confront. The couch where we'd spent countless evenings curled up together, the kitchen where we'd danced to old songs while cooking, even the bedroom door I now avoided. All of it was tainted, stained by betrayal. I found myself drifting through the hours, doing anything to keep from falling into the dark pit of my thoughts. Amanda's message sat unanswered on my phone. I reread it more times than I wanted to admit, my emotions swinging wildly between rage and a twisted curiosity. What could she possibly say that I didn't already know? What explanation could she offer that wouldn't make things worse? And yet, a part of me, perhaps the part that couldn't stop picturing her lying beside Kevin in that bed, wanted to hear it. I hated her for what she'd done, but I also needed to understand why. Late one evening, after another day of silence between Kevin and me, I made the decision. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly as I typed out a reply. Fine. Tomorrow at noon. The coffee shop on Main. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came almost immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. The next morning, I felt an odd sense of purpose for the first time in days. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve by meeting Amanda, but the thought of confronting her, of taking back some semblance of control, was enough to push me out the door. I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited, every passing minute stretching unbearably long. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. Amanda was the kind of woman who turned heads effortlessly, her confidence radiating in every step. She spotted me and hesitated for a moment before making her way over. As she sat across from me, I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse. For all her bravado, she seemed nervous, almost ashamed. Good, I thought bitterly. She should be. Liz, she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now. You're not wrong, I said, my tone sharp. I folded my arms across my chest, leaning back in my chair. Why are you here, Amanda? What do you want from me? She winced at the edge in my voice but pressed on. I needed to apologize. To explain. Explain. I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. What exactly is there to explain? You slept with my husband. That pretty much covers it, don't you think? Her face flushed and she looked down at her hands. You're right. There's no excuse for what I did. It was selfish and stupid, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I watched her, searching for any sign of insincerity. She seemed genuine, but that only made me angrier. Why? I demanded. Why him? Why me? You knew he was married. You knew he was my husband, Amanda. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. That night we were both drinking, and I wasn't thinking clearly. He wasn't either. One minute we were talking and the next, I don't know how it happened, Liz. I wish I could take it back. I leaned forward, my anger bubbling to the surface. You don't know how it happened? That's the best you've got? You just accidentally ended up in bed with him. She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. I'm not trying to make excuses. I know I hurt you and I hate myself for it. But Kevin loves you. He talked about you that night, Liz. Even then. He loves you, and he hates himself for what happened. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The idea of Kevin talking about me while betraying me was almost too much to bear. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay composed. You don't get to tell me how he feels, I said through gritted teeth. You don't know him like I do. You don't know us. Amanda nodded, her shoulders slumping. You're right. I don't. And I won't bother you again after this. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. And that it didn't mean anything. I stared at her, my mind racing. It didn't mean anything. Those words again, as if they were supposed to magically erase the pain, the betrayal. Finally, I let out a shaky breath and stood. I don't know if I believe you, Amanda. And frankly, I don't care. What's done is done. She looked up at me, her expression one of quiet resignation. I understand. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door jingling softly as I stepped into the cold air. My heart felt heavier than before, and I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing she said had truly given me clarity. If anything, it had only deepened the wound. When I got home, Kevin was waiting for me in the living room. He stood as I walked in, his eyes searching mine for some sign of where I stood. "You went to see her," he said quietly. "I did," I replied, my tone neutral. "What did she say?" I dropped my bag by the door and met his gaze. "She said it didn't mean anything. That you talked about me. That you love me." He took a step closer, his expression pained. "It's true, Liz. I do love you. I made a horrible mistake, but it doesn't change how much I love you." I held up a hand to stop him. Don't say that again. Love isn't enough, Kevin. Not anymore." His face crumpled, and I felt a flicker of guilt, quickly smothered by the anger and hurt that still burned inside me. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I know this. I can't keep living like this. Not with you." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "I understand." For the first time, his resignation felt real, as though he finally grasped the depth of what he'd done. And as I walked upstairs to the guest room, leaving him standing alone in the living room, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I had to find myself again, with or without him. The next morning brought with it the quiet clarity of exhaustion. My emotions, though still raw, felt dulled by the sheer weight of carrying them for so long. I woke in the guest room, the sunlight filtering through the thin curtains, and for a moment, I allowed myself to sit in the silence. No Kevin. No Amanda. Just me and the sound of my own breathing. I thought about what I'd said the night before, how I couldn't keep living like this. Not with him. The words had felt final when I spoke them, but now they lingered in the air, heavy with unanswered questions. What did it mean to move forward? Did I pack my things and leave, starting over in some small apartment far away from the life I'd built with Kevin? Did I tell him to leave and try to reclaim this house, this space that now felt like a prison of memories? Or did I try, against all logic and instinct, to fix what had been broken? The questions swirled in my mind as I dressed and made my way downstairs. Kevin was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He didn't look up when I entered, and for a moment I considered turning back, retreating to the safety of the guest room. But running away wouldn't solve anything. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. The tension in the room was thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and tired. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Morning," I replied, my tone equally subdued. We sat there in silence, the clock ticking loudly in the background. It felt like a standoff, each of us waiting for the other to speak first. Finally, I broke the silence. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to move forward from this." Kevin leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I don't know either," he said. "But I'll do whatever it takes, Liz. Whatever you need me to do." His words sounded earnest, but they only deepened the ache in my chest. "You keep saying that," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "But it doesn't change what you did. It doesn't change the fact that you shattered everything I thought we had." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I hate myself for it. I wish I could go back and undo it, but I can't. All I can do is try to make it right." I stared at him, searching for something, remorse, understanding, desperation. It was all there, written plainly on his face. But it wasn't enough. "Making it right isn't just about you, Kevin," I said. "It's about whether I can live with this. Whether I can trust you again." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And can you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I didn't respond because I didn't know. The truth was, I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that this was an isolated mistake, a moment of weakness that didn't define who he was or what we had. But the memory of that morning, of seeing him with her, was a wound that refused to heal. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can." The words seemed to deflate him, his shoulders slumping as he looked away. "I'll give you time," he said after a long pause. "I'll give you space. Whatever you need." His offer was a small comfort, But it didn't solve the problem. Time and space wouldn't erase what had happened. They wouldn't make it easier to look at him without seeing her. But they might give me a chance to figure out what I wanted, who I wanted to be in the aftermath of all this. For the rest of the day we avoided each other, moving through the house like strangers. I spent hours scrolling through apartment listings, trying to imagine myself starting over in a new place. Each listing felt like a step toward freedom, and a reminder of everything I'd be leaving behind. Our home, our life, our shared dreams. Letting go of all of that felt like admitting defeat, like conceding that the life I'd fought so hard to build was irreparably broken. But staying felt just as impossible. That evening Marissa called. I stepped out onto the back porch to answer, needing the cool evening air to ground me. "Hey," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Hey," she replied, her tone gentle. "How are you holding up?" I let out a bitter laugh. "I don't even know. Everything's a mess." "I'm a mess." "You're not a mess," she said firmly. "You're dealing with something unimaginable. And you're doing the best you can. That's all anyone can ask of you." Her words brought a lump to my throat, and I swallowed hard against the tears threatening to fall. "I don't know what to do, Marissa. Part of me wants to leave, to walk away from all of this. But another part of me can't imagine letting go." "It's okay to feel both," she said. "You don't have to decide right now. Take it one day at a time." "I'm so tired of hearing that," I admitted, my voice cracking. "One day at a time feels like a prison sentence." "I know it does," she said softly. "But you're stronger than you think, Liz. And no matter what you decide, I'm here for you." Her unwavering support was a balm to my battered soul. And for the first time in days I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I didn't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe it was okay to sit with the uncertainty. To let time and distance reveal what my heart already knew but my mind refused to accept. As I hung up the phone and stared out at the fading light, I realized that the path forward wasn't clear. It was messy and uncertain, filled with pain and doubt. But it was mine to walk, and for the first time since that awful morning, I felt a small spark of determination. I didn't know where the road would lead, but I was ready to take the first step. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of resolve, though it was muted, like the first weak rays of sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Kevin was still in the house, his presence marked by the faint sounds of the television humming in the living room. I didn't want to face him yet, but avoiding him forever wasn't an option either. It was time to start making choices, even if they were small ones. I got dressed and made myself a cup of coffee, the ritual feeling both grounding and strangely hollow. As I stood by the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the backyard, my mind wandered to the life we had built together. The garden we had planted one spring, the barbecue nights with friends, the lazy Sundays spent under the shade of the oak tree. All of it felt so far away now, like someone else's memories. I hated how tainted they felt, how even the good moments now carried the shadow of what he had done. Kevin appeared in the doorway, his hair unkempt, a cup of coffee in his hand. He hesitated when he saw me, as though unsure if he was welcome. "Morning," he said softly, his voice cautious. I nodded, taking a sip from my mug. "Morning." He lingered there for a moment before finally stepping into the room. "I was thinking," he began, his tone tentative. "Maybe I should stay somewhere else for a while. Give you some space." His suggestion caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to agree immediately, to seize the opportunity to have the house to myself, to breathe without the weight of his presence pressing down on me. But another part of me, the one still clinging to the life we had shared, hesitated. If he left, it would feel like the first real step toward the end, like we were admitting that the damage was too great to repair. "Where would you go?" I asked, my voice neutral. "I could stay with Brad," he said. "He's already offered. Or I could get a hotel. Whatever you're comfortable with." I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but all I saw was exhaustion and regret. He seemed genuinely willing to do whatever I needed, even if it meant leaving. "Maybe it's a good idea," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. "Just for a little while." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Okay, I'll pack a bag." As he turned to leave, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite identify, loss maybe, or the faintest hint of relief. Watching him walk away, I realized that this was the first real distance we'd put between us since everything fell apart. And though it scared me, it also felt necessary. By the time he came back downstairs, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the swirling patterns in my coffee. He stopped in the doorway, his gaze lingering on me as though he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally he spoke. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said. "But I want you to know that I'm not giving up on us, Liz. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I can be better." I didn't respond right away. What could I say to that? That I believed him? That I didn't? The truth was I didn't know how I felt. So I just nodded, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. He left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made the right decision. But as I sat there, alone in the house for the first time in days, I realized that this was what I needed. Space. Time. A chance to think without his presence clouding my thoughts. The first day alone felt surreal. I wandered through the house aimlessly, avoiding the guest room where I had been sleeping, avoiding our bedroom where the memories were too sharp. Instead, I spent hours in the living room, staring out the window at the street, watching cars pass by and neighbors walk their dogs. The world outside was so normal, so untouched by the chaos of my life, and it made me feel both disconnected and oddly comforted. By the second day, I started to feel the weight of the silence. Without Kevin there, without the tension between us filling every corner of the house, I was left alone with my thoughts. They were relentless, picking apart every detail of what had happened, every sign I might have missed, every decision that had led us to this point. I wanted to stop thinking, to quiet the noise in my head, but it felt impossible. Marissa called again that evening, her timing impeccable as always. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm and steady. "He's gone," I said, skipping the small talk. "He packed a bag and left this morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line and then, "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, I guess. But also lost? Feels so final even though I know it's not. At least not yet." "Maybe that's a good thing," she said gently. "Sometimes you need that distance to figure out what you really want." "Do I even know what I want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do I want to forgive him? Do I want to try to fix this? Or do I just want to walk away and start over?" "It's okay not to have all the answers right now," she said. "You've been through hell, Liz. Give yourself permission to take things one step at a time." Her words, as comforting as they were, didn't make the questions go away. But they gave me permission to sit with them, to let them linger without rushing to find solutions. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Kevin usually sat, and let myself feel the weight of everything. The days stretched into a rhythm of solitude. I went to work, I came home, I cooked meals for one. The silence of the house became both a comfort and a reminder of the void Kevin had left behind. I avoided looking at the wedding photos on the mantel, avoided the drawer where his shirt still sat neatly folded. It was easier not to think about him, about us, but the thoughts always crept in, uninvited and unrelenting. One evening, as I was sorting through some old papers in the living room, I found a letter tucked into the back of a drawer. It was one Kevin had written to me years ago, back when we were still dating. His handwriting was messy, the words filled with the kind of raw emotion that only comes from falling in love for the first time. Reading it now felt like a punch to the gut. How had we gone from that to this? How had we let everything we had fall apart so completely? I clutched the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know if we could ever get back to the people we were when he wrote it, but a small part of me wanted to try. And that terrified me, because trying meant risking more pain, more disappointment. But it also meant the possibility of healing, of finding our way back to something resembling love. For the first time in days, I picked up my phone and called Kevin. When he answered, his voice was hesitant, almost fearful. "Liz, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Not tonight, but soon." "Of course," he said quickly. "Whenever you're ready." As I hung up, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. The day I agreed to meet Kevin felt like the first step toward something unknown. A path I wasn't sure would lead to healing, closure, or even more pain. I chose a neutral place, the small park where I often walked to clear my head. The weather was cold but bright, the kind of crisp autumn day that felt clean and sharp, as though the air itself demanded honesty. Kevin was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench beneath a towering oak tree. He looked nervous, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his eyes scanning the path until they found me. He stood as I approached, but neither of us made a move to close the space between us. There was a chasm now, invisible but undeniable, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be crossed. "Hi," I said softly, breaking the tension. "Hi," he replied, his voice tentative. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, sitting down on the far end of the bench. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence filled by the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Finally, I turned to him, the questions I had carried for weeks rising to the surface. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why did you do it, Kevin? What was missing? What did I do wrong?" He shook his head quickly, his eyes wide with desperation.
Liz, no.
You didn't do anything wrong. This wasn't about you. It was about me. About my mistakes, my weaknesses. I don't even have a good reason. I wish I did. I wish I could point to something and say, this is why I hurt you, but I can't. All I know is that I was stupid, and I let myself forget what I have with you. His words stung, not because they were cruel but because they were so heartbreakingly honest. There was no grand explanation, no hidden reason to make sense of his betrayal. Just a thoughtless, selfish act that had shattered everything we'd built together. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said quietly, the admission feeling like a stone dropping into the space between us. "I don't know if I even want to try." He nodded slowly, his face crumpling. "I understand. And if that's what you decide, I won't fight you. I don't have the right to ask for another chance. But Liv, I still love you. I've never stopped loving you. And if there's even a small part of you that thinks we can rebuild, I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worth it." His voice broke on the last word, and I could see the tears glistening in his eyes. For a moment I hated him for making me feel this way, for stirring the embers of love and anger and grief all at once. But more than that, I hated the part of me that wanted to believe him, that still longed for the life we had shared. I looked down at my hands, the cold biting at my skin as I weighed my next words. "I don't trust you," I said finally, my voice steady. "And I don't know if I ever will again. But I still love you too, Kevin. And that's the problem." He exhaled sharply, as though my admission was a lifeline. "Then let me prove it to you, Liz. Let me earn your trust back. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, anything. Just give me a chance." The desperation in his voice tugged at my heart, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. "If we try, it's going to be hard," I warned him. "It's going to hurt, and I don't know if we'll make it through. I can't promise you anything." "I don't need promises," he said firmly. "I just need a chance." I stared at him, my emotions warring within me. Forgiving him felt impossible, but walking away felt unbearable. Maybe it was foolish, but a part of me wanted to believe that we could find a way forward, that the love we once shared was strong enough to survive even this. "All right," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "One chance. That's all you get." Relief flooded his face, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once been my best friend, my partner, my everything. He reached for my hand but stopped himself, waiting for my permission. Slowly, hesitantly, I let him take it, the warmth of his touch both familiar and foreign. "We'll take it one day at a time," I said, meeting his gaze. "But if you break my heart again, Kevin, that's it. I won't survive this twice." "You won't have to," he promised, his voice steady. "I swear to you, Liz, I'll never hurt you again." As we sat there under the oak tree, the weight of everything that had happened hung heavy between us. But for the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope, not for what we had been, but for what we might still become. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with doubts and challenges. But for now we were both willing to try. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.